such as this. Now, Kelvin Chin, oh my, what a CV he has. Executive Director and founder of the Turning Within Meditation, of which probably all of you already know that, and Overcoming the Fear of Death Foundations, internationally recognized meditation teacher featured in Business Insider, Newsweek, Kaiser Health News, and has taught meditation at West Point and in the U.S. Army, including the DMZ in Korea. Been meditating for 54 years and has taught meditation for 50 years to thousands of people in over 60 countries, although I believe it's what, 68 countries?
68,
yeah. Yes. Graduate of Dartmouth, Yale, and BC Law. Has lived in 7 countries. I've spent my life on a couch, and that's why I'm here and he's here. You're here, you'll be discussing Overcoming the Fear of Death through each of the 4 main belief systems. It is a best-selling book. The books are in the back for a ultra slash price of $10, and I'm sure he will autograph them if requested. His second book, Marcus Aurelius Updated, 21st Century Meditations on Living Life. It's a collection of 67 essays ranging from emotions, life principles, meditation, and the spiritual. His third book, After the Afterlife, describes how his memories reach back 6,000 years, have resurfaced over the past 45 years. I want to know more about that. That sounds interesting. So, Kelvin Chin.
Thank you, David. Thank you, David. Thank you very much, David. David's obviously the main contact for me here at the library. He's done an amazing job. I just want to thank David very specifically and explicitly for his help. Great to have you all here today. We're going to talk this evening, and I am going to talk for about, I'm going to do an abbreviated version of my Overcoming the Fear of Death talk. Abbreviated means I'm going to try to keep it to about 20 minutes, and I want to open this up for a good 45 minutes of questions from all of you. And I want to let you know that you can cover anything that relates to Overcoming the Fear of Death. This is my first book, which we're going to focus on today. Just give you a quick overview first. So this is what we're going to focus on today, Overcoming the Fear of Death. And as David said, the full title is Through Each of the 4 Main Belief Systems. Now, 4 main belief systems, understand, are not religious. They're not cultural beliefs. So when I talk about 4 belief systems, I'm going to explain to you in a few minutes what they are. You'll see what I mean, okay? Because all the work I do is not religious-oriented work. You could consider it spiritual in the sense that it helps support people's thinking and beliefs, whatever their specific beliefs are, through their specific religion. But as David mentioned, I work with folks around the world, 68 countries, every religious persuasion, every religious background, and then people who are not religious, people who maybe just consider themselves more spiritual, or people who are atheists, agnostics, and are spiritual, or who don't consider themselves spiritual. I help everybody is my bottom line. So I'm not here to change people's beliefs. I respect people's beliefs. But what I do is help people think about these things differently. Now, we're going to talk about death and dying this evening. He mentioned this book, my second book, Marcus Aurelius Updated, is a collection of 67 essays that I've written. And as he said, they're about basically living life. So my first book is about death and dying, and then this is more about living life, not about death and dying. How to live life with more happiness and less suffering. Actually, this is my first public talk where I'm mentioning the following to anybody publicly. So this is going out on Zoom and it's on Facebook Live right now. But I'm going to start the first Sunday of every month at 10 a.m. Pacific. I usually live in Los Angeles, California. 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern time. I'm going to start doing a monthly open forum discussion about, and I'm calling it Living More Happily. And several of my students it's their idea. They kind of said, you should do something more on a regular basis, talking about the ideas that I talk about here that are sometimes confusing ideas, things like forgiveness. How do you forgive somebody who's hurt you? Things like why do people act in a cruel way, and how can you deal with that? These kind of thorny life issues, that's what I cover in my second book. I'm going to start doing that on a monthly basis, picking one of those themes and then talking about that monthly and then having an open discussion on that the first Sunday of every month. Actually, those people who know the Zoom link that I'm using for this one this evening, that monthly session on the first Sunday of every month has a separate Zoom link because I'm opening it up to the public, et cetera, et cetera. But you can register by finding it on my website. By the way, just the easiest way to find my website is just to go to Google my name, Kelvin Chin. You have to remember to put the L in there, KELVIN CHIN, and then that's how you can find my websites. And then you'll see all of these different events that I host, and that's free, by the way. That's going to be free monthly and so forth worldwide. This is my third book that David mentioned, and this is where I talk about my memories reaching back 6,000 years. You got to understand that you're talking to somebody here who did not believe in heaven. I went to church when I was growing up. I grew up in Norwood, Massachusetts, those of you know, suburbs of Boston. And I went to church, but I didn't believe what was being said to us in church. I went to church because my parents said I had to go to church when I was growing up. But in my mid 20s, I started having experiences that were impossible to describe, impossible to explain through my normal science lens that I viewed the world through. And so this is a collection of some of those experiences that started in 1977 for me. And I get very explicit. I get really explicit about how the experience happened, what happened, what was I sitting, meditating, was I lying down, sleeping, was it in a dream, was it standing in the shower, was I driving the car down the street with the radio off, and I get these unusual experiences started happening for me. So that's kind of a quick overview of the three books. This is the one I said we're going to focus on. 4 main belief systems. So let me just explain to you why I wrote this book in the first place. So this book came out 8 years ago, 2016. It really was inspired by the death of my mother. My mom died when she was very young. She was 50. I was in my late 20s, and she died very suddenly of a very advanced stage of cancer. Lung metastasized to the brain, if you know, you've heard that pattern before. But she was asymptomatic, no symptoms. And then she slipped on the stairs. We had this, you know, if you know what a split level house is, I say that because it was only like 4 or 5 stairs, you know, not a big flight of stairs. And she slipped on a couple of the stairs. She thought that was unusual. She went to the doctor, and then, you know, the rest is history. They found all kinds of stuff. And she died very quickly. It was my 3rd year of law school. It was very traumatic for me. I was very close to my mom. I started helping people with grieving before I knew what the word grief meant, literally. I mean, I generally knew what the word grief meant, but I didn't know what it meant experientially until, you know, my mom died. And I was walking down hallway law school at Boston College Law School, and somebody asked me, and I can't remember who it was, but you know how people ask you, like, well, how are you doing today? And you go, oh, I'm doing fine, even if you're not, because you don't want to get into it. Maybe you don't know them that well, and for a lot of reasons, you just say, yeah, I'm okay. And for the most part, that's what I was doing after my mom died. But one day, I don't know why, but that happened. And I said, well, my mom died. And I started getting choked up. And the person just went, whoa, really? Their brother had just died. And then somebody else started talking, comes into the conversation. We start talking, and then, these self-disclosure things can open other people up who wouldn't normally tell you stuff, right? And so what happened was people started calling me up nights and weekends, and I just did it for free. This is in the 1980s. And I would just help people because it helped me. And some of you are here. I know some of you are here in person in the audience here, several of you, because we met through different grief groups that our friend Sharon runs. And we've had a lot of conversation about these kinds of things. And I started thinking about this because sometimes there would be 3 or 4 people in the conversation. This was back in the 1980s, remember now, long before computers. So these are face-to-face conversations. And when people kind of got into the conversation who had a really, really, really strong belief about death and what's going to happen, sometimes they try pushing that belief on the other people. And we know from our grief counseling work that that's not a good thing to do. Somebody's grieving, you need to listen, so forth, and not push your agenda on others. And I started observing this, and I said, you know what? There's got to be a better way for people to talk about this, because when that starts happening, what do? You shut down, right? It shuts you down. It's like you don't want to go there, especially if you're grieving. You're already sensitive in the first place, feeling sensitive. And so if somebody's laying their stuff on you, that's like the last thing you need, because you already got your own stuff you're dealing with through your grieving, right? So I thought, how can we talk about death and dying a little bit more openly? That's where this came from. So that's why I started thinking, how can we talk about this without looking always through a religious lens? Oh, that's my belief. That's my belief. I know, but my belief's this. So I talk about these 4 main belief systems. So let's talk about what they are. The 4 main belief systems are this, and these underlie and support all the religious and cultural beliefs out there. Science belief, which is where I came from originally, right? My own beliefs. No afterlife. That's it. Your brain and your mind, they're connected. They're one and the same from the science standpoint, right? You die. That was my father's belief, and I have a lot of stories, some funny stories from my dad, about my dad in there. And that was his belief system. He used to say, stick me in a box, throw the dirt on me, I'm done. That was his famous phrase that he'd tell you, even if he didn't know you, he would tell you, he'd start talking to me, he'd just tell you that. He just very openly, and without any, no apology, just say that. That's a science belief. Second belief that's out there, I call it the fear of continued existence. So again, remember, these are underlying beliefs. So fear of continued existence. A lot of people have a fear around death and dying. What's going to happen to them? Is there going to be punishment after I die? Even if you don't believe in punishment after you die, what's going to happen? Is this going to happen? Is that going to happen? And so forth. And there can be various fears associated with that. So I just generally call that second belief the fear of continued existence. Third belief is a belief in an afterlife. So just like in the second belief, there's a belief in an afterlife. But the third belief, there's no fear. So the third belief may be you're looking forward to heaven or afterlife, or depending on what culture or the religion you come from, you may call it something different. But you're looking forward to life continuing after your biological body dies. Okay? That's the third belief. Fourth belief that exists out there in the world is reincarnation. Past lives, future lives, you can come back in another body if you choose to. There's that belief out there, okay? Those are the 4 beliefs out there that are very general beliefs but pretty much people fall somewhere in there. Now, you may be a hybrid. I talk about that in the book. You may be a hybrid. You may be a fence sitter. I'm a little bit of one of this one or that one, or I'm not sure, or I'm kind of believe some of this one, but I'm not sure, but I believe some of that one, and you kind of put them together, and that kind of, you're a little bit mixed, and that's okay, right? Because I tell people, when are we all going to know what really is going down, right? We're going to know at what I call that most intimate moment of our lives. That most intimate moment is what? It's when our biological body shuts off. And I say intimate. Why do I say intimate? I say intimate because who are we with? With ourselves, right? At that most intimate moment. Yes, there may be other people in the room and so forth, loved ones, friends, and whoever. But at that moment, when our biology shuts off, when the machine that we call our body shuts off, people call when we die, we're alone with ourselves. That's as intimate as you can get, right? So what I do in my nonprofit, my charity work, my foundation work now, is that's what I do. I help people reduce their fears about that. Because if I can help people reduce their fears about death and dying, then I can help them live a fuller life now, right? Which is, we all have the present. That's it. We only all have the present. And every present moment, I call it the continual present because it's continually changing, isn't it? Like what I just said 2 seconds ago is the past now, right? It's not the present anymore. So it's a continual present. And so that's what I do with my work, right? But that's the 4 main belief systems. And just kind of open up questions in a couple of minutes. I'll touch on a couple of things on the 4 belief systems. So as I already talked about, the first one's the science belief, right? And if you really have the science belief, you should have no fear of death, because what is fear? Fear is the emotion caused by the anticipation of unhappiness. Well, if you think like my dad did, my dad was really, he really did believe science belief. My dad was an engineer. My mom was a chemistry major at Boston University. She was a chemist before, you know, she had this baby here. And if you really believe the first belief system, then you should have no fear, because you don't believe that there is going to be anything after you biologically die. And if fear is the anticipation caused by the anticipation of unhappiness, my dad would say, well, I'm not afraid of anything because nothing's going to happen. I can't experience pain, pleasure, or anything. There's no experience. All right. So you'll hear some, people like, I'm curious, how many people have the first, would you say, first belief system? Show of hands. First belief. Yeah. And then, and so, do you have a fear about death and dying, or no? Or you like my dad?
My fear is more, when is it gonna come, as opposed to when it does.
Right. Okay. So that's a very good point. So for those people, I'm going to repeat it so that in case they didn't hear it on the microphone on the computer. So he said that he has the first belief system, but the fear is more when is it going to come than what happens after. All right. It's a great point, because that's a related fear. It's absolutely related to the fear of death, obviously. But it's not actually the fear of death, how I define it is the fear of what happens after we biologically shut off. Okay? So, but we'll come back and talk about that in a second. So you make sure you remind me if I don't hit it enough. All right. How about the second belief? People have second. How many people have the second belief? Fear of continued existence. Fear of not knowing what's going to happen after you die. Anybody fear not? And the what you're afraid of could be different things. Doesn't matter. Yeah. Several people. Yeah. I'm just saying this for the audience here. So for them. You teeter. Yeah. 2 and 3. And 3 is what? If 3, what do we say 3 was? Kind of looking forward to it. Like, yeah. How many people looking forward to it? Yeah. They're like not afraid. And, you know, I'm not saying you want to die immediately, but, you know, you're enjoying your life now, but you're okay with it, is when I say looking forward. You're okay with it. There's not a fear related to it. So several people. And then how many people, anybody past lives, reincarnation, believe that we can come back again? Sort of. Yeah, a couple of people. Yeah.
I like the possibility.
You like the possibility. Yeah. Yeah. You like the possibility. And I think it's that's a great candid way of saying it, right? Because you don't know until you know, as I always say, you know, we're all going to know at that most intimate moment, I said, right? But yeah, that's great. So it's interesting, this audience we have here, we got a little of all four belief systems. That's not always the case. And when I give these public lectures, and of course, it depends what part of the country and part of the world I'm in speaking and so forth. But that's great. We have a little of all of them in this particular audience. So let me just say a couple of things, and then we'll open it up to more of your involvement, the live audience here. And then if people on the Zoom call can also speak up if they want to. And for the Facebook Live people, I put the Zoom link in there if you didn't notice it yet. If you want to get involved with our discussion live via Zoom, the Facebook Live people can, log on to the link that I posted on the Facebook Live comment there. So that was first belief. I want to just talk briefly, highlight that again. Fear of continued existence. Again, there's all kinds of fears about continued existence that people could have. One of the big ones that's out there that I hear a lot about from people around the world is fear of punishment. Bottom line, I'll just go right to the heart of that one. My experience, and you've kind of probably infer from some of the things that David said in my CV and my introductory bio, I've had a lot of experiences on the other side. In addition to my past life memories opening up in 1977, in 1986, again, I was not looking for this. This is completely spontaneous. I never had first of all, with past lives, I've never had a past life regression or anybody walk me through anything. It just spontaneously happened. And in 1986, I spontaneously started getting communications from the other side. And at first, I didn't even know it was from the other side. I thought it was just me, like an inner voice talking to me about stuff like what, and I didn't believe in that stuff. But then I started getting all kinds of information about people I didn't know, and then I started corroborating that with the people I didn't know and find out that I was knowing stuff that I didn't know. And I didn't consider myself particularly psychic or, like I wasn't like doing mediumship work or anything like that. I was a lawyer. All right. Anyway, so my point is that my experience on the other side is there is no punishment. There's no structural punishment. So I just say that to folks. Again, I'm not here to change belief systems. I'm just sharing with you some of the experiences that I've had, and you can take it or not. And I tell my students, I consider you all my students here right now, at least for the next, another 45 minutes. You're my students. I tell my students, make your own decision about what anybody tells you, including this guy right here. So I am about empowering people and encouraging people to think on their own and take what makes sense to you and shelve the rest. And it might sit there on the shelf for 2 months, 2 years, 20 years. And then you might pull it off and you go, oh, maybe I'll consider that. Or it may sit on the shelf forever and you never take it off because it doesn't resonate with you. My whole thing is I encourage my students to be involved in their own personal self-development. Well, what are the two key words in personal self-development? Personal and self, right? It's personal. That means it's yours. It's yours to own or not own. It's yours to figure out and to figure out in whatever way makes sense to you. So I am a teacher. I am not a preacher and I am not a guru. I am not here to ask for people to follow me. I'm here to share ideas and perspectives, and if they make sense, then great. So back to this 4 belief systems again. And then the third one we talk about is the, open and receptive to an afterlife and maybe even looking forward to it, or at least not afraid of it. And so what I talk about in my first book, I talk about some of these glimpses you can get into that. And how many people have heard of an NDE, near-death experiences? You've heard that term before? Yeah. And so that is a way for people to get a glimpse into it, because obviously it's a glimpse. It's not a full-on because they didn't die. It's a near-death experience, right? But you can go on YouTube if you don't know what this is. But basically, you'll hear people talking about almost dying, and then experiencing what they describe as heaven or the afterlife or the other side, depending on what their belief system is. They may use different terminology, but it's what happens after you biologically die. And and very often what you'll see, and what I've seen, because I've heard hundreds now, since I've been doing this since the 1980s, I've heard hundreds and hundreds of people's, stories about what their experience was. It's a huge range, is the point, and it tends to be filtered through their belief system, whether it's a religious belief, a non-religious belief, or whatever their belief system is, tends to be filtered and through that lens, and that's how they end up describing it. So, for example, people who are Christian very often talk about Jesus or God or angels, etc. People who are Muslim may talk about Allah. They may come back and they're talking about Muhammad, seeing Muhammad, and Buddhists will talk about, being visited by Buddha, et cetera, et cetera. So it depends, which kind of lens that you're looking through, and it tends to be interpreted that way. That's been my experience. But near-death experiences, my point of just mentioning this is that they're a glimpse into the other side. And then there's signs. I talk about this in my first book, messages, signs, sometimes from dead loved ones, and sometimes giving you signs like, I have one of my students, one of my clients, she told her father before her father died. It's kind of funny story. I kind of need to lighten this up sometimes. She a funny story where she told her father before he died, look, I don't want pennies. I don't want nickels and dimes. If you want to give me a sign, Dad, quarters would be great. And she gets quarters. And now that's really unusual, because quarters you can actually buy something with several quarters. Whereas pennies, people leave pennies all over the place because they're so worthless. Those of you who are watching internationally, I'm talking about money in the United States, right? Pennies aren't worth very much here, right? But quarters are, and so she finds quarters. And so that every time she finds quarters, which is unusual, right? That's like a sign from her dad, or feathers, or cardinal birds, certain kinds of birds, certain things people will feel are certain signs, a perfume or cologne of the dead loved one, all of a sudden filling up the room. It's like, where's that from? There's nobody here, right? There's nobody biologically here anyway. That kind of thing. So these different signs are, again, more glimpses that there may be something to that third belief system we talk about. And in past lives, we talk about, reincarnation and so forth. I give an example of, I only talk about in my first book, this one example of mine when I was a slave about 2,300 years ago, and I almost died on a piece of wreckage in the Mediterranean. And I was African. I was very dark, black skin, and I almost died in what it took me a while to figure out when this was. I didn't know immediately it was 2,300 years ago. I started seeing visions of the ships and the ramming. And so I knew it was, a certain time period when ramming of ships was the mode of naval warfare at the time, and so forth. But the bottom line is, I've always used my memories, whether it's this lifetime or another lifetime, doesn't matter, they're memories, to inform me more about myself and how can I live more in the continual present that we talked about earlier, with less suffering and more happiness. To me, that's what it always distills down to. That's what I teach my students, I teach my students to look at these things if they ever have any memories popping up. And again, whether it's a memory from this lifetime or another lifetime, doesn't matter. How can we learn from our life experience, really? I think that's the takeaway from all the work that I do. So that's kind of, the picture of death and dying and how to overcome the fear of death. I'll give you the final couple of sentences on this, and we'll open it up to discussion. Number one, I talk about a two-pronged approach. Number one, experientially, by changing our cortisol levels and our adrenaline and our lactic acid, and there's 40 to 60 other hormones and chemicals, depending on which endocrinologist you talk to. They stop counting at different points where that have to be in balance. They have to be balanced in order to not feel anxious, to not feel fearful and in the fight or flight mode. So you probably heard of the fight or flight terminology, right? And so that triggers a whole host of a cascade of hormonal flooding into the system to help us survive. So it's not a bad thing. But the problem is it's turning on way too much, way too often in the 8 billion people on planet Earth right today, okay? So that's one aspect of how to overcome the fear of death, is the balancing of our chemistry, our biology, our physiology. And the other is improving our understanding and clearing up what I call cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance means our thinking, cognitive means thinking, dissonance means it doesn't work, it doesn't fit. So where's our thinking off? Where we may think we want to get from this point to that point, but the path isn't right. You know, the choices that we're making. But in our thinking, cognitive dissonance has to do with our thinking and therefore our beliefs. And the more we can align and line up our desires with our thoughts and our actions and our behavior, that reduces fear and increases happiness, because fulfillment of desires, isn't that what happiness is all about anyway, right? So that's the second prong of the overcoming the fear of death approach. The first is experientially, changing our chemistry, expanding our conscious capacity of our mind so we feel freer and not so constricted. That's the experiential first prong. And the second prong is improving our understanding about death and dying and the nuances of it, and the things like we just started to talk about. I'll just come open it up to you. Go ahead.
No, my fear, if it's a fear, I guess it's a fear, is that, and I don't want to know that tomorrow is my last day here on Earth, but my fear is that it's going to come sooner rather than later. That's kind of a fear.
Right.
But it's going to come when I'm not maybe, but it'll come when I'm not ready.
Right.
And I don't know what ready necessarily means to me. I haven't figured that out.
Right.
But when I'm not ready, I don't want to go because I'm not ready. I had an instance in my personal life, my mom and my dad. My mom was 94. She died just about 2 years ago. My dad was 95. He died just this past year. So they're very close in age. But my dad was ready. My mom wasn't ready. She got dementia and she was sick for a couple of years, but and she sort of faded away. She died. My dad was pretty good at his faculties. He's a little forgetful and such, but with healthcare coming and making sure he took his meds and he ate every day kind of thing, he was okay. But he was ready, because he would often say, "Why am I here? Am I right? Why am I here? All my friends are gone, your mom's gone." When you live to 95, most of your friends that you grew up with and you from work and with your profession and all that kind of stuff, they're gone. We got a couple of family members, thank goodness, still hanging in there. But that was it. He's like, "Well, why am I still here? I can't believe I'm still here."
Yeah.
He'd go to the cardiologist like a year before, and the cardiologist was a new person because the former one sold his practice. A young guy comes in. My dad goes for a checkup. He had a lot of heart problems. He had a pacemaker and all that kind of stuff. And the cardiologist said, well, prior to that, my dad said the cardiologist was the comic. And I said, "What do you mean he's a comic?" Because he's a young guy. He's very funny. I said, "Well, what's so funny about it?" Because when he said, "I'll see you next year, Mr. Warren." It wasn't a year, but so my dad was in his headspace. He was kind of like, I'm done this, I'm ready to go. And I don't know particularly what he thought, but I think for the most part, he thought that there was an afterlife, and he was going to visit, join my mom, and he was ready to go and see my mom again.
So it sounds to me like, based on what you just shared with us.
I apologize, a little too much.
No, it's great. It was great. No need to apologize. It was great. It was beautiful. Is that you would like to be in the headspace of your dad?
Yes.
Yeah, that's what yeah,
Absolutely.
right? Yeah, yeah. And so what I can share with you, again, there's no magic formula to this. There's no pill, take this pill and you'll have exactly what you just asked for. No, it doesn't work that way. But what you're describing, the fear that you're describing, I would distill it down to, it sounds to me like it's the fear of uncertainty, which I talk about a lot, right? Fear of uncertainty, not sure.
Mhm.
And you would, because if you were sure, which nobody ever is, but if you were, you think, you conjecture that, oh, the fear would go away. And that's really not the way life works. If you think about it, just again, step back, just think about rationally. Is anything in life absolutely certain? Not usually. There's very, very seldom, very few things are certain. So what I tell people is, what I help them do is get rid of the fear. I can't help them get rid of uncertainty that exists in the universe, but I can help them get rid of the fear. And so back to that formula is by balancing our chemistry and by expanding our conscious capacity of our mind. So David briefly mentioned that I've been teaching meditation for over 50 years, and I've taught thousands and thousands of people in 68 countries now. Actually, a couple of my students are here. So one of the benefits of that is that it balances our cortisol and so forth. But it also, and I know this because I was a test subject in the very first medical studies ever done in the United States on any kind of meditation in 1970, 71. And when I was 19 years old, I was a test subject in the studies. And they took blood samples and they did a whole blood panel thing. So I know what the cortisol and the lactic acid level, I can't remember what else they measured, but all of that balances. So physically, but then mentally expands the meditation expands our conscious capacity of our mind. So what does that mean? That means wakes up more of our mind, and you can even think of that abstractly, or you can in terms of consciousness or awareness or soul or spirit, or you can think about it very biologically in terms of brain cells, that it wakes up more and enlivens more of our brains. So you can look at it either way. You end up in the same place, which is more expanded awareness and more clarity of mind. And what does that do? What that does is it helps reduce your fears, because now you start to feel more in control of stuff that you can control, and you start to let go of the stuff that you cannot control. So that's when I say clarity of mind, that's clarity of mind. When you can control what you control, and you do a pretty good job at it. Nobody's perfect. But you let go of the stuff that you can't control because you can't. It's a waste of time, right? So that's where the rubber meets the road. And where that is, there's not a line there, but it's just like an area. We want to get in that area. That's what I call balance, right? And so that would be, to me, the formula. That's as good as it gets. The mistake most people make is they think the more they control life, that the happier and the less fearful they're going to be. No, in fact, the opposite. The people who get more controlling get more fearful because they start to realize there's always something else they can't control, right? So it's actually the opposite that actually gets you out of the fear mode, right? I don't know if that helps. Yeah. Did you have a? Yeah. No. Yeah. Other comments, questions?
I just wanted my aunt used to say something. She would say, God is my father, heaven is my home, but I'm not homesick.
Yeah, that's beautiful. God is my father, heaven is my home, but I'm not homesick. Yeah, I'm good here. Good while I'm here. Yeah, I think that's beautiful because I often teach, or I don't know if teach is the right word, but I encourage people to live here while we're here and enjoy being here while we're here. And whatever that means, eating ice cream if you like ice cream, or eating chocolate if you like chocolate. But I'm not saying you should or you shouldn't. I'm just saying you don't be sad that you are here, or in some people's cases, angry that they're here and wishing that they were elsewhere. we are where we are, and I encourage my students to take advantage of wherever they are in life and enjoy it as much as possible and learn and figure out how to navigate life, which is what I do with my students, obviously, how to navigate life better so that we can enjoy it. So that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
Can you speak to us more about the meditation practice, like daily meditation, 10 minutes a day, an hour a day? What does that look like?
So for me, the meditation practice looks like 10 to 15 minutes twice a day, morning and in the afternoon or early evening. That's what I teach my students. But only need to do it 10 to 15 minutes if it's an easy and effortless process. It should be an easy process. It should not involve concentration, focusing on the breath. No, should not involve focusing on the breath, should not be focusing the mind, should not be trying to clear the mind of thoughts. Those are all the kind of classic archetype descriptions that you usually hear about meditation. And I teach the opposite, because if you've ever tried to stop thinking thoughts, what happens?
You get more.
More thoughts, exactly. Thank you very much. There's a fundamental principle that you just said more succinctly than I say, which is trying always creates more activity in the mind. That's it, more thoughts. Trying always. You know, I have a lot of students who have anxiety attacks, panic attacks. In fact, not far from here where we are now, one of my students, if you go on my website, you'll see his testimonial, you'll scroll down, he's a doctor, and he was at the heart of COVID, New York City, COVID Central, we would call it, figuratively speaking. Right there in 2020. Before he started working with me for about 10 years, he would get anywhere from 6 to 8 panic attacks a day. This is an emergency room physician. 6 to 8 panic attacks a day. I don't know how he could function, but on a bad day, a really bad day, 15 to 20 panic attacks. I don't know how you can get that in a 24-hour period, right? But he would go off to a room and just gather himself for 10, 15 seconds or whatever, and then he'd go in to deal with a patient or whatever. This was his life for 10 years. Now he not only does he have no panic attacks, he has no anxiety anymore. But that was one of my most extreme cases of what we're talking about, where he had tried everything. He tried, pushing the thoughts out, quiet the mind. It just makes it worse, because you're already in your head when you're having an anxiety attack like that. You're all up in your head. The worst thing to do is to try to get yourself out of your head and just put you more there.
And when you're sitting there, you're like, I don't want to be thinking about it. I can't be thinking about it.
Exactly.
And then it just, yeah.
It just swirls. It's like I tell people, you don't think about the word hippopotamus right now. It's too late. You just did. Now you're like, why did he say hippopotamus? Oh, you see it on it again. It's like you can't. That's the way our minds work. So back to your question, the way I teach meditation is not to fight the current in the stream. Don't fight the current. Now, that's not the technique, but that's the attitude. That's the background in the way that I teach it. Don't fight the current of the mind. The mind wants to wander. It wants to go here and there. It just does that. Don't fight what the mind is naturally trying to do. I just taught a meditation class. I finished teaching it's a 4-day class I teach, a couple hours each day. And so I just did one yesterday. Yeah, yesterday. And then one of my students, nobody had ever said it this way before, but one of my students said, yeah, this is like the way I teach the meditation. I call it turning within meditation. The way I teach meditation, she said, it's like, why would you try to stop your heart from beating? Because it is naturally beating. And why would you try to stop your lungs from breathing when it's naturally breathing? And yet, most meditation techniques are trying to stop your mind from thinking, which with what your mind normally does all the time anyway. Why would you do that? People aren't trying to stop their heart from beating in order to be healthier. They're not trying to stop breathing in order to be healthier. But everybody's trying to stop their mind from thinking. So I thought it was great. She was like, yeah, wow, nobody said that before. Exactly right. So instead, I teach people how to allow the mind to think whatever it's thinking and yet be in an undirected state. And so that's what the technique involves. Because if you're allowing the mind to be in an undirected state, the mind can allow to get out of what the psychology professor back in the 1960s, one of my students told me this story. In the 1970s, I taught the student of this psychology professor. And the psychology professor evidently told his psychology students, he said, all of you students here, you incorrectly think your mind is like this little 8-inch bucket with about 10 to 15 ping pong balls bouncing in and out of it. Ping pong balls are like your thoughts and your emotions, your feelings, your experiences. And you think that little 8-inch bucket is your mind. He said, no. He said, go down the street. It was at the University of Houston, Texas. He said, no, go down the street at the Houston Astrodome. It sees 90,000 people. That's your mind. Not the little 8-inch bucket. But you only have a little desk lamp, as if it is an analogy, over the little 8-inch bucket. And you're in the dark, you're in the Houston Astrodome, huge football stadium at night. You can't see anything. And so I've taken his analogy and I say, that's what I teach people to do, how to turn the light switches on the rest of their mind. And that reduces their fears, their anxieties, all the uncertainty stuff that we talk about, right? That's how the fear goes away, because not the uncertainty, but the fear goes away. Why? Because you kind of go, this little 8-inch bucket, I'm like this huge, that's me. Like I can handle it. So it develops a sense of security, a foundational groundedness within, very naturally. And so does that answer your question, Professor Kelvin?
Yeah, but suppose someone was focused for 10 minutes or 15 minutes on beating themselves up. Where's the juice in that? At least if they're focused on their breathing or a mantra, or say I had a meditation practice, and I can see the value in that versus 10 minutes of sitting and being quiet, but then thinking about everything they're getting ready to do next. And
right. So what you're describing, I agree with you completely. So what you're describing is the person sitting there thinking. So in the experiments I was in, for example, they had another group of people sitting there just doing what you just described, sitting there thinking. They said, close your eyes and just relax and just think about whatever. Okay, so what do you think that they were thinking about? Exactly what you just said. They're thinking about all the problems they got. That's what I call content-oriented meditation process. They may have not called it that, but that's how I label it. Because you're getting caught up in the content of the thoughts, right? All that does in that analogy of the professor, psychology professor analogy, that just keeps you right in the bucket. That's just looking at the ping pong balls. That's your thoughts and emotions. And some of them are like ugly, like this, the ping pong ball, oh, it's an ugly one, or maybe it's a nice pink one, like that. But you're just looking at the ping pong balls. That's all that is. That doesn't get you out of the bucket. But focusing on a mantra, focusing on a mandala, or focusing, now, maybe it's a semantic thing. So let me just define what I mean when I say focusing. I mean focusing, concentrating. I mean holding your mind on something. That also is symptomatic of what the professor's calling the 8-inch bucket part of our mind. The 8-inch bucket part of our mind that's the part of our mind we use when I just drove 2 hours to get here to the lecture tonight. I'm looking through the windshield, focusing my mind on the traffic and slowing down and where's my foot on the gas pedal, brake pedal, and all that. That's an important part of our mind. But for us to get rid of our fears and to reduce our cortisol levels and our anxiety and so forth, we need to get out of the bucket. So that's what I teach to do. And it's not about just looking at the ping pong balls, like you said, right? So it's about teaching the mind in a nutshell. I'm just kind of giving you a general statement here, but it's about teaching our mind how to be in an undirected state. Undirected does not mean looking at those ping pong balls and just, getting upset about all the different people. That's not an undirected state the way I'm using the word undirected, right? So that's as much as I can say in a kind of a general way, because then we're starting to get into, well, what's the technique and what are you doing? And then what are you doing? If that happens, then what do you do? Well, no, then we're in the class. But I appreciate what you said, and I agree with everything you said, right? Right? Except the focusing part, we don't focus in terms of holding the mind. That's going to be just focusing and looking at a ping pong ball that you might like, but it's still in the bucket. You haven't expanded your capacity. So what I teach in my class, change it structurally. So if this makes sense to people, I'm going to use a phrase. In the meditation class that some of you have taken, it changes the structure of how we experience, not the what. So you were describing some of the what's. The thoughts and so forth. Those are what's. That's a what. That's not a how we changing the structure of experience. So what does that mean? Give you a specific example we've all experienced. The difference between being awake and being in a dream state. That is structural. Because you could be sleeping at night and you could have a dream at night of riding a horse at night, right, Alicia? You could be riding a horse in your dream.
I fly, I jump,
Yes, in your dream.
I'm alive when I'm sleeping.
Yes, you're alive when you're sleeping. You're very aware. I know that. You and I've had this woman here. We've had many conversations. Just so you know, people off camera can't see you, but we've had many conversations. And you have a very vibrant dream state, very alive, very real dream state. Not everybody remembers their dreams, but I know Alicia does. Here's my point. My point in terms of the structural point is that you could have dreams, I don't know if you have had, but you could have dreams where you're riding a horse, you're flying, and then all of a sudden, the horse changes into a car. That can happen in a dream. These kind of phantasmagorical things that can happen in our dreams. I know I have dreams like that sometimes, That doesn't happen in waking state. When I'm driving my car down the street, it doesn't even turn into a newer car. I don't have a new car like the one I'm driving. It doesn't. I wish it would. But it doesn't. It's the same car, a 15-year-old car I have. That's true. I have a 15. So she knows what I'm driving right now, like compared to my 15-year-old car. So no, it doesn't change into a horse. It doesn't change into a different kind of car. That's structural. That's an example of what I mean. Where you see the experience can be very similar. In the dream, I could be driving a car. I could be driving my own car, my 15-year-old Lexus in my car. Yeah.
Run little cycles, and I have never ever in my life touched it with a cycle or a car.
Yeah, but in your dreams you are.
I do.
In your dreams, yeah. Alicia's, I won't say how old you are, but Alicia's over 40 years old, let's just say, all right? Yeah. Oh, wow, she goes.
Just made my day.
Yeah, you made her day. And she's riding motorcycles. She's riding motorcycles in her dreams. Exactly. But see, so my point is that's an example of a what. That riding motorcycles in dreams can happen in waking state. But the motorcycle ain't going to change into a horse in waking state, but in the dreams it can. That is structural. You see, that's what I mean. So what my point is that when I'm teaching people to meditate the way I teach them, it gets their mind out of that 8-inch bucket part of their mind, and it structurally changes how their waking state is. So that initially they start to feel calmer, but then they feel more clarity of mind and so forth. But down the road, years down the road, some of my students start talking about having 180-degree vision, as if it's not that their eyes, and it's not an eye test thing, it's a sense of self that's so much bigger. That is a structural change. That's not a, oh, are you having a different thought? That's a what. You see the difference between what I'm saying. So anyway, that comes about by not continually trying to focus in your meditation, like most techniques do. And that's why you only have to do it 10 or 15 minutes instead. Yeah. Yeah. Other questions? Good stuff. Yes.
So I guess it comes kind of in between two of your books encompassing,
Okay.
and one of the belief systems of what happens to us, the fear, have that fear. So you've been here, you're here with us now.
Yeah.
And you've been over there many times.
Yeah.
Is there actually purgatory that we go and get stuck in?
So what do you mean? Well, let me ask you, so you tell me, what do you mean by purgatory? Is there purgatory?
So, like I said, I'm between 2 and 3, like I don't have a fear because when I go, if I go to heaven, my hope is to see my father again, my beloved animals, you know, everyone that I've loved that has gone before me.
Yeah.
I say if I go to heaven, because I have that fear of, you know, being raised Catholic and Christian that, oh, if you're not good, if you didn't
Okay.
behave, if you did this, you know, you're gonna get stuck in purgatory and then people need to pray for you and you have to wait to ascend and that's, I guess, a person's individual, maybe your individual hell. I'm not necessarily afraid to go to hell,
Right,
but like.
like an in-between state, yeah,
that
yeah,
You're just like trapped and stuck.
Right.
So is that, you've been,
right.
so.
So again, I'll tell you my experience, right? This is my experience. You can take it or leave it, but this is my experience. My experience is there is no such structural place. You notice that I use the word structural. What do I mean? Why do I use the word structural? And why do I use the word biological when I talk about biological body dying? Because let's talk about the biological body and then I'll come back to this. Biological, I use the word biological because this is biology, it's chemistry here. This is a machine that's working and it's got things in chemistry and hormones and all that has to work properly, right? Well, when we biologically die, we still have a body, but it's not a biological body. That's why I started using the word biological instead of physical body, because a physicist would say, if they were on the other side seeing what I have seen on the other side, they would say, yeah, we still have bodies, but they're light bodies, they're energy bodies. And a physicist still considers energy, you know, part of something that can be measured, et cetera, et cetera. So we don't have a biological body. I say we don't have structural punishment on the other side. Why do I use the word structural? Because can somebody still, let's just say, self-flagellate, you know, self-punish themselves? Sure. Because where is that happening? In our minds, right? So it's not a biological thing. It's a self-induced thing. And people do it here on this side. How many people have ever done that? I have. To myself, you know, on this side, right? And so that can continue depending on the individual, right? That's a choice you make, right? So in the same way, in a similar way, could there be a group of people who might punish you on the other side? People ask me sometimes about bad people who die, people who've done bad things, hurt people. Let's say, when I say bad, I mean they're hurtful people who've done hurtful things to other people on this side. Do they get punished on the other side? And I say, well, my guess is that they are going to get punished, but not structurally. They're going to get punished by all of those people they hurt, because the people they hurt, nobody forgets. You know, you ever heard that phrase, forgive and forget? That's a bunch of baloney. I almost said something else, but you know, it's not true. We never forget if somebody hurts us. We don't forget if somebody loves us and helps us and nurtures us either, right? So same thing on the other side, but not structurally. I've never seen any purgatory-ish or hellish things on the other side. Now, people will come back and they'll say that they have had those experiences. There's some NDEs out there. You don't hear them, they don't get a lot of publicity, let's just say, because they're not popular. But people will come back and say, oh yeah, I went to hell on the other side, whatever. Self-induced. They either have such a fear in their own mind that they're going to get punished for whatever it was, however big or small it was. In their mind, it's big. It doesn't matter what anybody else thinks. And then they come back and they have that experience. But my experience is it's self-induced. Does that make sense? Because if you think about, let's go big picture. Let's talk about hell, purgatory from the big picture. If you believe in God, and I'm not saying you have to, and I don't tell people whether I do or I don't, okay? Because that's my personal thing, and you know, I don't push my thing on other people. But let's just assume that for those people who do believe in God, I think most people would agree, say hopefully 99%, but I don't know. It's not a scientific study to be done on this, but they would believe that God would be a loving God, not a vengeful. Certainly, if there was some being like that, a vengeful, spiteful being. I don't know about you, but personally for me, that's not somebody I would worship. I wouldn't even be friends with. It's just not. But so let's just assume that loving, well, and intelligent, smart. Hopefully, we don't have to debate how smart or how much this being may know. But let's just assume, I would think, that the being knows more than humans. Okay, I think most people would agree that. If they're going to be worshiping somebody, they're not going to be worshiping somebody that's dumber than humans. Okay, hopefully. But again, free will, choice, who knows what people are choosing. But let's assume that they have that belief also. Smarter than humans. Well, we as humans already know from hundreds and hundreds of studies that punishment doesn't change behavior. We know that. You need to have other incentivized behavior in order to change behavior. Punishment, mere punishment, and I remember I went to a lecture once given by the Los Angeles County District Attorney, and her job was all about that, keeping stats. And it just happened to be a lecture. She was, I don't even know what her general theme was, but one of the things that she cited was the recidivism rate in Los Angeles County, and it was something like 67% of the incarcerated inmates, when they're let go, they're back in prison within 6 months, and then something like, I think 2/3 of them are back within 3 weeks or something like that. It's so punishment doesn't change behavior. So assuming that if there is a God, if you believe in a God, some being or whatever, who's got a great mind, knows that because they're smarter than people. Why would they punish? It makes no sense to me. And it's not my experience. So, but I thought I'd go tiptoe into the God area just a little bit. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Anything else before we close it? We gotta, we gotta wrap at another 40. Yeah. You're sleeping here tonight with us, David? I got the keys. We got the right guy in the house here. We got the guy with the keys. Anything else before we go?
Yeah.
Yes, sure.
I'm wondering if you're familiar, I just heard this recently.
Yeah.
John Bell, he's Scottish, born in 1949, and he did a reading, and it was entitled, "I Never Asked to Be Born."
Mm.
And it's very beautiful. I was trying to find it on YouTube, but I couldn't. Is anyone familiar with that? But basically, is anyone know? Basically, he's saying, I'm trying to pull from memory, that he never asked to be born. And yet, and he's talking about death, and he's saying, but yet, he didn't want to come here, but then he came and it was fine. And, and it's like, we're all afraid of death, but yet, once you go, it's fine. And it's very beautiful, but if I can find it again.
So I'll comment on some of the principles you just mentioned. So it sounds like, first of all, let me just say something positive about what I'm inferring from what you're saying. It sounds like it's an uplifting thing anyway.
Yes.
Yeah, which I'm all about that. One thing that, well, I'll just make some general comments. I won't comment specifically about, but there's some comments that those words elucidated in my mind. So here's the thing. We make, my experience anyway, again, this is my experience, is that we make choices. And it's my experience also, not just personally, but it's my experience based on talking to hundreds of people who've had memories of being on the other side before they came in to planet Earth, okay, is that we choose to come in. We choose to come in. But here's the thing. What does choice mean? Okay, I'm going to give you some examples of how subtle that can be. And this is a teaching, so because you guys, I've told you, I'm a teacher. I'm trying to help you move forward with more happiness and less suffering in this life in the afterlife, and if you come back again, if you want to come back again. That's how broad my teaching sphere is, okay? So I'm going to plant some seeds in your head when I talk about what does choice mean here, because I think it's true. That's my experience, that we all choose to come here. And some people say, choose to come here and a terrible life. It was so difficult, and this, that, and the other thing, and so forth and so on. Or so much physical pain, because maybe some biological autoimmune issues, et cetera, et cetera. So here's the thing. Number one, you can't control everything. So we do make choice, I think, and we'll come back to how subtle. Let me give you some subtle examples of what choice I mean by choice in a second. But let's just talk about control. We can't control everything. We can't control, exactly which body we get and so forth, some of that gene pool and so forth. You can control it to some degree because, oh, see that family down there? And I have some stories actually, I think there's some stories in all three of the books that allude to this. The idea of picking a family before you come in, and oh, I wanted to go to that family and so forth for the father, but the mother, or the mother, but the father, whatever. Or sometimes you're lucky, you're like, yeah, I want both of them, or whatever, or maybe you come into that family because of a relative and not even the parents and so forth and so on. So you guys have been together, that, we've talked about this. So this is you don't know, you can't see what I'm pointing at. I'm pointing at a daughter and a mother here, just for those that were off camera. But we can't control all of that either. Once we come into the family, who's to control who ends up marrying into the family and affecting it this way and that way and so forth and so on and so on. There are a lot of factors that we don't have control over, okay? So coming into a family is a choice that we can make. Let's talk about that choice issue. So sometimes it's a choice like, oh, I am choosing to go into that family, right? One of my cousins, Karen, has a shared experience. I've known her for like 60-something years, right? Since little. She never said anything to me until she took I teach a 6-part afterlife series where I talk about all these things in like great detail in like two and a half hour sessions, each for 6 sessions. And she brought this up like at a Q&A. It's my cousin I grew up with, she's like, oh yeah, I remember when I was, I can't remember, she was 5 or 6 years old. And she had a memory of being on the other side playing with her friends. And all of a sudden she said, oh, I gotta go, my family's ready for me. And she came down the chute and she was born into my Aunt Evelyn's womb or whatever, sometimes my point is sometimes it's very clear, the choice like that. But there are other times where I've heard stories. It's not my personal experience, but I've heard stories from others of my students and clients where it's much more subtle. And one guy was telling me, he lives in Southeast Asia now, one of the countries there, and he's telling me he was he remembers explicitly standing in a line. He's on the other side, he's in heaven or whatever you're gonna call it, right? And he's standing in this long line. He says, a really long line. And he's like, it's a line to come down and get into a body and come down on planet Earth. And he's standing in line, and he's waiting and waiting, and people are going, and it's starting to go faster and faster and faster and faster. And then, so this is a teaching point for you folks, okay? So then he goes, he's not sure why, but he had this feeling, this is how subtle choice can be, right? So he had this feeling, I need to change lines, and he changed lines, and he realized that after he changed lines, that line over here was going to a place down on planet Earth he didn't want to go to. And then this one went to a place that ended up, and again, how much of this is hindsight, how much of this is like being 2020, we don't know. But this was his experience, and he said, he claimed to me that this was his experience at the moment while he was standing in line, not after, now he's 50 years old telling me the story. But if you believe him, he had this feeling to go on this other line that allowed him to go to a country in Southeast Asia where he could emigrate to the United States, and he went to university in Ohio. It's Asian, okay, going to a university in Ohio, et cetera, and he had this whole career, versus this line that was going to China. So that was what, so my point is, pay attention on the other side. That's what I take away, whether you believe that story or not. I think it's always a good idea to pay attention. And he was paying attention. And most people he looked around, he told me, were not paying attention. So they were just in line because they saw a line and they went in line and they got in line. Okay? So is that a choice? Yes, that was a choice that those people kind of, a poor choice, you could say, maybe almost an unconscious choice, not a very conscious choice. He made a conscious decision, is the way he described it to me. And he's not the only one. I've heard those variations on that kind of theme. So again, what's the takeaway? Be aware. You know, don't just follow the crowd, whether you're on the other side or this side. I think that's good advice wherever you are, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Can I ask
Good. Yes.
2 questions?
Mhm.
When you're on the other side,
Hmm.
you come back voluntarily. And number 2, if you've been there more than once, is it always the same?
That's really good questions. Wow. So for those people that didn't hear, she said, you're on the other side, and you make sure I get this right. So when you're on the other side, you know, do you have to come here, basically?
No, I mean, like not everybody, not dying on the other side, but in the course of life, visiting the other side. As you described yourself having been on the other side and then coming back.
Oh, that's unusual, what my experience. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
I don't die. I don't die. I don't
No,
have to
I don't
die.
mean you die, but that somehow from this life, you occasionally pass in. You occasionally cross over to the other side
Yes,
and then
and
you
I
come
come
back.
back. Exactly.
So I'm just saying, do you come back voluntarily?
Oh, me personally.
You personally.
Oh, okay, good, sorry.
Free will.
Yes, I do. Yeah, I personally, I choose to come back. Yes, I like it here. And I like it there. I like it where I am, personally. So it's not, I don't pine away for one or the other when I'm on the other one.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, but you see in my 3rd book, you'll see I have a lot of lifetimes, a couple dozen over the last 6,000 years. And I probably had a lot more than that. But there are some that are fairly close together. And they're very, the outside corroboration for some of these memories that I've had that I even doubted myself, because I have this science rational mind and I question, I'm skeptic about my own stuff too, I capture in the book too. Some of the outside 3rd-party corroboration of some of those experiences. But my point to your question is, sometimes I'm only there for a quick time, but even this lifetime, during Kelvin Chin's lifetime, I can go and come back. I mean, yes,
Well, that's what I mean. Going
yeah,
back.
and I choose to come. I choose to come back. Yes. And what was your second part?
On the different occasions in this life, when you have crossed over.
Yeah.
Do you find it the same recognizable place?
Yeah, it is for me. Yeah, when I go over. So the question was when Kelvin Chin goes over, not just, you know, when Kelvin Chin personally experiences going over and coming back, do I experience it as does it look very similar to me? Yes. Yeah, it is. It's energetic, it's light. I can identify old friends, and it's almost like I use this phrase, we have an identifiable energy pattern. That's the phrase that I've come up with. It's like we can recognize that. And I'll see Alicia there, not right now, Alicia, but you know, in another 40 years when both of us are on the other side. You know? No, I mean when we're no longer in a biological body. When we run into each other, I will recognize her energy. I will recognize her energy. Now, can Alicia show me herself? Some of you may have had visitations. I know some of you have had visitations from dead loved ones, and you will recognize them. They can show you them, not just perfume or their cologne or whatever, can fill the room up, they can do that. But also, I've had experiences where I've seen dead loved ones or friends and so forth. And so, I like one particular friend, I knew him when he was in his 50s. He died when he was in his 90s, but I knew him in the 1970s when he was in his 50s. He comes to me, I see him when it's in his 50-year-old look, so to speak. But energy pattern, regardless of that, we recognize beings on the other side. So what I see, yeah, all of that is the same. And then energy, and then also the experience of time being different on the other side is consistent for me. The experience of time still exists on the other side, but it feels very different. The experience of time is very different from here on Earth. Subjectively, it feels different. It's kind of like, how, subjectively time can feel different when you're on vacation. It's like, where did the week go? I got to go back to work again. It's Monday, it's Sunday already. We got to get on a plane, whatever. But time is still happening. It just feels weird, right? Different. Yeah, good questions. Anything else? Yeah, really great question. Anything else? Yes, Carol.
Yeah, when you're talking about your life, one of the things that I don't have the answer to it. And, my thing is, I don't want to live. If I have Alzheimer's, if I've got something, if I'm really sick, I want to go.
Yeah.
I mean, I do not want, first of all, I don't want anybody to have to be involved with that at all. And I don't want, and when you talk about fear, that's.
Yeah, so I'll just repeat. So Carol was saying, if she has Alzheimer's or something that's really debilitating or whatever, she doesn't want to be here. That's her concern. Okay. So here's what I would say to this, and then it's a little bit, I'm going to be very careful about how I say this, judicious as possible, but my experience is that our minds, consistent with that psychology professor's analogy with the Houston Astrodome and the whole thing, that our minds are much more powerful than we realize that they are. And that let me just use myself as an example, so I can take you out of the equation, so I can make it just more, but you can extrapolate from this, okay? So I could talk about myself, and that way, maybe you can look at it a little bit more easily. If I was in that situation and my body was so degraded and just not working, the machine ain't working properly, right? I'm going to make my mind leave my body.
But if you have Alzheimer's, you can't make your mind.
Yeah, that's what people think. That's what people think. There is actually a professor. We were talking about doing some work collectively together. He's in Austin, Texas. I used to live in Austin, Texas. I've lived all over the place. But when I was there, we were talking about collaborating, and he does work on that, and he and other members of his department at the university would disagree with that principle. So I think that there's parts of our mind that can override things, even if externally it seems like somebody can't string a sentence together, or whatever the Alzheimer's thing is. They don't recognize who you are, whatever the symptom, however Alzheimer's is manifesting. I think there's something inside. And my experience, and I'm just extrapolating it, not talking about dealing with Alzheimer's, working with Alzheimer's patients now, but I have worked with many patients over the decades who are not, they don't appear physically, they don't appear mentally present. And yet I will talk to them as if they are. I will assume that they are. And I'll give you one example. So a woman contacted me from the UK, from London, England, and she found she just Googled you know, people look, they Google fear of death or anxiety about death, they find me, because I'm one of the top Google search results on that. And so she contacted me, she sent me an email from my website. She says, I don't know if you can help me, but my mom is dying, and she's on so much pain medication right now, the doctors are confused at how she could even still be alive. And so, and not only that, but her body is rallying, and she hasn't been able to communicate for 2 or 3 weeks with anybody. But she can open her eyes up so they know that she's awake, when she's awake and when she's asleep, that kind of thing, right? That's all they can tell. So I said, well, when are you going to see her next? And she said, oh, I'm going to go there tomorrow. And I said, great, well, take your phone and I'll talk to her. And tell me what her religious beliefs are and so forth, and what she believe, you know, in God or heaven, or what's her belief? She's, oh, devout Catholic, Irish Catholic, went to church, you know, 7 days a week, sometimes twice on Wednesday or whatever. She never missed. That's the point. Okay. So I knew what her filter was. And so I spoke to, so the daughter went, held a cell phone up to her mom with the speaker on, and I spoke to her mom, and she knew her mom was awake because her eyes were open. And I talked to her about what fears she might have, and how they would not be an issue if she died. And then I said, and there's no rush for you to let go. You know, you can stay here as long as you want, but if you want to go, then this is what you're going to see, and this is what's going to happen, so forth, and this is who will greet you. And the daughter texted me afterwards. So it was like a 5-minute, maybe 10-minute call at the most. She texted me afterwards, and she said her mom beckoned. She said her mom, the phrase she used was beckoned to me with her eyes. She blinked and beckoned to me. So I went up to her, and she whispered, "Beautiful." And then that night she went into a deep sleep. Or no, immediately she went into a deep sleep. That night or the next morning, she went into a coma. And then that next day, she died. So I have had many experiences like that with people who appear to not be present, who are present. And she hadn't spoken anything in 2 or 3 weeks. That was the only word she spoke before she died. So that's why, plus the research from the university in Texas, that several professors who are studying Alzheimer's and so forth. I don't know scientifically, I'm just conjecturing.
The same, you got an illness degree.
Yeah,
Same.
that's what yep. And I've talked to my friend George, and you know who George is. George and I have discussed this very thing openly with each other. Yeah.
Well, they hear you when you transition.
Yeah.
And I truly believe that, because the night that my father had his last rites read to me twice. A month and a half before, the doctors were like, he's going this weekend. And the first time they read him his last rites, he was looking at the priest's eyes open, tears coming out of his eyes. Wasn't talking, he was conscious.
Yeah.
But he wasn't talking, he wasn't saying, and the priest is like he gripped him and was like, "Bro, we'll go with God." Like it was so heartbreaking and beautiful and dramatic, all like at the same time. And he's tearing as the priest is, saying this. And I was convinced that my father hung around for almost 2 months, kind of to prove to us like I wasn't ready to go. But when they told us he was entering the transitioning phase, he suffered so much. And the night, a couple of hours before, I finally did something that I hadn't been able to. And I spoke to him and I told him, like, it's okay. My mom was asleep, my sisters were asleep. I told him, it's okay. Like, it's okay for you to go. Like, I don't want you to. We're gonna take care of mom. Like, it's okay to be with your mom and your brothers and grandpa. And I really believe that I had never said that to him before, and we were very close, and he was gone within a few hours. And I truly believe that maybe he stayed for me and for
Yeah.
her, because he knew we would suffer, and kind of like that gave him like permission.
Yes, permission.
And, you know, doctors would come in and they were like, how's he still here? And I even had a doctor, he said, has he seen, what do you think he's waiting for? And I responded, maybe he wants the Mets to win the World Series, because we were going into.
What's the Mets to win the World Series?
Postseason. But I'm
Right.
like, nephews have come from South
Right.
America, from California, Florida. I said, we've put everyone on the phone that can't, like, I don't know, but I hadn't gone to him
Right.
and said that.
Right.
And then, so I
You and your father are so close.
I believe that
Yeah.
they can definitely hear us. and-
Oh, definitely. Absolutely. I've seen that story. I've seen that. I've heard similar stories, Carolina, so many people. And I actually know nurses, hospice nurses. I've known many hospice nurses over the years that I've been doing this kind of work, who actually proactively work with the families to help them through their grieving process so that they don't hold on to the loved one and cause the loved one more suffering, physical suffering before, right? So, because they can feel that too, while they're here still, never mind on the other side, but yeah, but that's beautiful. Thanks for sharing. Yeah. Anything else before we go? This is a great group, really good group, very good. Anybody on the Zoom? I haven't asked, but anybody have any questions on the Zoom here?
How many people are on the Zoom?
Oh, we've had about a dozen people on the Zoom, and then I don't know how many on the Facebook Live, because I haven't been flipping back and forth and looking, but yeah, that's great. Any other questions? Anything at all? Anything at all?
Yes, this is Lewis. How you doing?
Hey, Lewis, yes.
Hey, yeah, so one of my questions is just I just lost a pet, and it's one of like the biggest things that has hurt me big time. And I'm just wondering, like, are we allowed to, or will we be able to see our pets in the afterlife?
The short answer is yes. Short answer is yes. I'll give you a longer answer. Is that the end of your question? I can talk more about it.
Yes.
Yeah. The short answer is yes. We see our pets. All minds. All animals have minds, and all minds have souls. And so, yes, our animals have minds and souls. And the more we have a close, loving relationship, like it sounds like you had and still have, Lewis, with your recently transitioned pet, the more, the sooner, the easier, the more likely you're going to see each other. And you may get visitation as well. So here's a little bit longer answer. So my daughter, who's 29 years old now, did not tell her mother or me what I'm going to tell you until about, she's 29 now, maybe 10 years ago, she told us. And she and her mom figured out, they triangulated, they figured out that this event happened in around 1999. So do the math, a long time ago. So, but my kids have grown up with this stuff, their mother and I, we just talk openly about this stuff. It's like, they were both at my father's death, when my father died in our house, so forth. So I tell some stories about my kids in the books. But bottom line is, my daughter had crawled into bed between her mom and me one night, 1999 evidently. And she come in the middle of the night from her bedroom, and she was asleep. And she said she woke up in the middle of the night. She doesn't know what time it was dark, pitch black. And she saw these two light beings at the end of the bed, these two vibrating figures of light. And she knew it was my mom and my dad. Now, she's never met, my mom died in 1982. My daughter was born in 1994. And my father died in 1999. So she knew my dad. She was about 5 years old when my dad died in our living room. So we had a hospice nurse caring for him, and we had moved him into my house and so forth for the last 36 hours. But she'd never met my mom. And so she saw my parents smiling at her foot of the bed. But to your point, Louis, also lying on my bed, at the foot of my bed, on my feet, was my golden retriever, whose name is Shogun. He died in 1990, 4 years before my daughter was born. She's never seen him before. She didn't know anything about his behaviors. And he was, if you can see your camera there, Louis, she said my dog was lying on my foot like this, like on my ankle, his head, which is exactly what he used to do. He used to do that so he wouldn't wake me up, but he knew I was there. She didn't know that. So that's an example of something that I talk a lot about in this book, about personalities continuing. That's the personality trait of my dog and how he behaved and slept with me on my bed that my daughter didn't even know, right? So that's how an example of how do you know that that was my dog? How do you know that the personality trait, there's a behavior, there's a habit there that's still continuing after he biologically died, my dog, right? So I hope that helps, Louis.
Yes.
Anything else before we call it an evening?
Well,
Yeah.
if you retain those personalities
Hmm.
after you die, how can you evolve further?
Well, yeah, good question. If you retain these personalities, how can you evolve further? Well, the issue there, the rubber meets the road, is are we each learning, which I choose to do, I choose to do about myself anyway, and you'll see examples of this. There's a lot of behavior that I talk about that I did 1,000 years ago that I wouldn't do today, right? But there are personality traits that still exist in me from that existed then. But how am I expressing those personality traits? Am I expressing those personality traits in a more loving, altruistic way that's less hurtful to others? I hope so. Okay. But does everybody evolve and grow? Not necessarily. Some people stagnate. Some people get, a little bit of you know what an eddy is? Like in water, it kind of they keep circling the same little eddy because their behavior, they just keep falling into the same pattern with the same people. And it's the same people, lifetime after lifetime, and they keep there's a fear there that prevents them pulling themselves out of the eddy. And I think those fears there could be due to many things, but one of the things that I think, for me anyway, that I don't have is the fear of embarrassment. And the fear of embarrassment and what other people are going to think about you, I think is a big one. I think it's bigger than most people realize. And it travels with you from lifetime to lifetime. And I think that's a big one to work on. And I mean that seriously. It's a heartfelt thing, and to the extent that you can work on it, it's not easy, and I've worked on that for a long, long time. And so, yeah, personality traits do continue, but can you get stuck? Yes, that's what you're kind of implying. But can you grow as well? And yes. And so do certain personality traits that I have, I'll give you one that's not a real, it's not one that you want to expand, really work on and like make your whole life is being stubborn. So I have this stubborn streak in me. Do I want to like really like, yeah, I want to make that one like the number one? No, but but has that held me back at times over the thousands of years? Yes. And so have I seen that personality trait that's still in me, but have I worked with that and then, you know, made it so that it's not so dominant, right? And have I looked at other traits that I have and made them more dominant, right? So that my external expression of who Kelvin Chin is in this external behavior that I feel more, that I'm happier about, right? Yeah, that's a good question. Thank you. Anything else? Really good questions, you folks. Wow, what a great audience. Thank you. I applaud you. I applaud all of you for your questions. Really good stuff. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Carol.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you, Carol, for setting this up. Carol Raucher, who is Chairman, CEO, President, and Chief Everything Person of the local Chamber of Commerce. Yes, and thank you, Carolina, for introducing me to Carol, to Carolina and Carol. And Carol calls Carolina Carol. That's
Because I know,
Yeah.
I know what you really call Carol, right?
yeah, right. Anyway, thank you, everybody. We'll see
Thank
you.
you so much.
Okay. Take care. Thanks for coming, everybody, on Zoom too. Facebook Live. Take care.
It's strong mind.
Yes.